You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where Raina Wilson brings together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and truth. So many times it's easy to become discouraged in your own pursuit of health because your story or circumstances look drastically different from your favorite influencer or even the expectations you had for yourself. If that is you, welcome! This space is for you to learn, breathe, and maybe just listen and see what wellness could look like for you. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have occupational therapist and holistic sleep specialist Taylor Kulik. Taylor has developed a passion for helping new mothers overcome their sleep-related fears and helping them get back to trusting their intuition. She provides radical re-education about how babies and children should sleep and offers holistic and responsive sleep support to parents who don't want to sleep train. In this episode, we break down some of the buzzwords in the sleep training world, as well as how to actually support your babies and young children as they progress through sleep stages. Taylor's wisdom was especially helpful for our own family right now, navigating toddler sleep, so let's dive in. Hello, Taylor. Welcome to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course. This is definitely a conversation that I've loved just having with friends. So being able to hear it from the expert that we've all kind of fangirled over is really special.
Oh, you're so sweet. I actually feel I hate the term expert because I'm not saying that to like get on you. It's so interesting to me because I think we live in a society where we've really medicalized parenthood and motherhood, and we have to trust in the experts and outsource our authority. And so whenever somebody calls me an expert, I'm like, no, I'm not the expert. I have some knowledge and I want to share it with you because you're the expert on your child.
No, I love that. And the reframe is so important, especially as we're navigating our own healthcare journey with our family right now. So that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But I love how you just kind of started off and saying no, this is a space and platform. And I love that from your page, it's no, I'm giving you the power, you the tools to make your discerning choices for your family.
Exactly.
So I would love to just get started in hearing a little bit about you, your family. What does life in the day-to-day kind of look like?
Yeah. So I have two kids. I have a little boy who just turned 3, and my oldest is about to be 6. And we homeschool, and I also, of course, have a business. So I'm kind of a work from home, do it all homeschool mom. I have a husband. We live in Utah, so we really like to be outdoors. We like to go hiking. We just try to get outside as much as we can. We like to garden, all kinds of outdoor stuff. And that's really it. We're just trying to live our best. We try to get as close to nature as we can, even though we live in a city. So, it's kind of fun.
That sounds super fun. We're stuck in the middle of Texas right now. So.
Oh, I'm from Texas.
Okay.
I love Texas.
Yeah.
I'm from Central Texas. So.
Okay. That's where we're at.
Nice.
And we're from Texas and we claim Fort Worth as home. But I'm definitely excited for our next Army move so we can have a little bit of green.
Yeah.
So it will be nice. But I'm super curious just to hear, what was it like for you and your heart and maybe with your family to get started in this sphere of kind of just, I think, deconstructing what sleep, like you said, is so medicalized and was honestly one of the biggest daunting topics when my husband and I found out that we were pregnant. So I would love just to start there and unpack that.
Yeah. So when I first had my daughter almost 6 years ago, I had only really heard about how babies should be sleeping through movies and TV shows. And, I looked at the mommy blogs and things like that a little bit, but I didn't really start doing a lot of researching until obviously I had her, because I think that when we are actually in the midst of it and having challenges and struggles is when we tend to go down the rabbit holes. And so I was really expecting that she would probably not sleep very well in the first couple of weeks, but then should gradually improve. And over the next few months, she should be sleeping independently. That's kind of what we are told about how babies should sleep, is they start with really poor sleep in those early weeks. And then by the time they're a few months old, maybe even 6 months old, they should be sleeping through the night independently without feeds. And that was just completely the opposite of what I actually experienced with her. And my early months of motherhood were really dark, literally and figuratively, because I had postpartum anxiety and depression. And I truly believe that a lot of that was exacerbated by the pressure to get her sleeping in a certain way, to get her sleeping by herself. And so I spent long hours during the day alone with her in her nursery, which was dark. So literally dark days, trying to, I remember thinking that I had to get her to fall asleep by herself in her crib. And so she would be nursing and she would fall asleep, and I would unlatch her, wake her up, stir her a little bit, put her in her crib, and wish for her to fall asleep by herself. And then she wouldn't. And then I was frustrated. And then I would do the whole thing over again. And it would take me like 2 hours to get her down for a nap that she would only sleep for 30 minutes or less. And so it was just really exhausting and overwhelming. And I thought the whole time, I'm failing her, because this one basic thing that is, it kind of seems like it's the defining factor of our early days of motherhood, is how our baby is sleeping. Because when we go out in public and people see that we have a new baby, what is the first question they ask? It's how's she sleeping? Or it's either that, or is she a good baby?
She a good sleeper? Yes.
Yeah. So it's all about their behavior, and are they crying too much, and are they sleeping enough? And that it feels like that's how we define ourselves as mothers. And so, of course, I felt like I was failing. I felt like maybe there's something wrong with her, but also there's something wrong with me as a mom. And so we went through months of that. I tried a little bit of sleep training at night, because she was sleeping in a pack and play at the foot of our bed. And, the first couple of months I could put her in the pack and play and she would go back to sleep after I fed her. But at around between 4 and 6 months old, all of a sudden she wouldn't be laid back down in the pack and play. She would scream and cry for me. And so I tried a little bit of sleep training. I let her cry, just didn't feel right. I really couldn't do it longer than a few minutes at a time. And then I said, this is not happening anymore. I remember my husband asked me, why don't you just leave her in bed? Because that's the only way she was sleeping. I would lay her down next to me, she would nurse, and then she would go right back to sleep, and everything was peaceful. And I said, no, absolutely not. That's so dangerous. I'm a healthcare professional. I learned that this was dangerous. I work with medical professionals. It's been so ingrained in me that you should never, ever bed share. And so eventually I just gave in, and I just let her stay in bed with us, because we were all sleep deprived, and it was for survival, right? That was our only option at this point. And that's when I started looking into the work of people like Professor James McKenna and Helen Ball, who study bed sharing, who study breastfeeding dyads who bed share. They call it breast sleeping. And I realized that I'm not alone, and I thought I was alone. I felt a lot of shame. I would never admit to somebody that I was bed sharing. And I realized that so many parents are bed sharing. They're just not talking about it. And so as I kind of gained confidence in doing the research and realizing, there actually is a safe way to bed share, and there are benefits to bed sharing in addition to that, I started kind of, when someone would ask me about it, like I was talking to a fellow mom who had a young baby or a young child, I would kind of mention, we bed share, and I would see what would happen. And what always happened was that, or most of the time, that mom would say, oh, we bed share too, or we bed share early in the morning. They start off in the crib and then we bring them into the bed in the morning. Over and over again, I was hearing from moms who had never told me they bed shared, but when I admitted I bed shared, they also, I guess, were somehow given permission to say that they bed shared too, if not full-time, then part-time. And so that's basically how I got started. I just saw that there's so many parents out there who don't want to sleep train, who don't feel good about sleep training, who have unrealistic expectations of how their children are supposed to be sleeping. And so that's where I started. I wanted to kind of shift the perspective, change the sleep paradigm, if you will, of how we believe babies are meant to sleep, and offer some support, and if nothing else, solidarity to the parents who are in the midst of it but don't want to let their babies, cry in their crib by themselves.
Oh, for sure. until I was introduced to your page, like you said, I didn't know that basically unload this level of shame for what my husband and I had decided was safest and most comfortable. And like you said, it was at a point of survival to make the decision to, like you said, breast sleep. So, what really is the difference between what you are encouraging and supporting and just educating families on versus, I think, the typical, when somebody hears sleep training patterns?
Yeah. So everyone has their own definition of sleep training, and that's a really tricky thing in this space.
Okay.
So what I define sleep training is, I have kind of a complex definition that I share on my social media, but just for simplicity's sake, I'm referring to non-responsive sleep training methods, which means that
Sure.
we are leaving a baby when they're dysregulated, when they're crying, when they're signaling. We're leaving a baby for them to sort it out on their own. Now, this is different than, say, a baby who is upset, but like mom is alone and mom has to pee. So mom's going to go to the bathroom for 2 minutes and leave baby somewhere safe and then come back to baby, because
Right.
the goal of that isn't to train a baby to stop signaling, right? The goal of that is that mom has to meet her needs too. Mom's human, and mom needs to do something for herself. Like it's urgent, right? So
Right.
there's a difference there that I think people need to understand. In terms of sleep training, it's purposeful and it's for a reason. And the reason is it's a behavioral extinction method, which means that the end goal is to stop the signaling. And if we think about it, that is illogical because babies signal to it, that they're meant to signal to us through their crying because they can't speak to us and they can't meet their own needs. And so that's the main thing. I have some other like pieces of my sleep training definition. Like if something is feeling really bad to you, if something's feeling like it goes against your intuition, that would be sleep training. And this can look different from parent-child dyad, from one parent-child dyad to the next, because we also have to take into account the child's temperament and their unique needs, and also the parent's temperament and their unique needs. Something that feels really fine to one parent-child dyad might not feel good to the next. And so that is kind of where there's this nuanced difference as well. What I advocate for is responsiveness in general, but responsiveness doesn't necessarily mean that your baby is attached to you 24 hours a day. I mean, a lot of times that's necessary and that's what babies need, depends on the baby, but that's not necessarily what that means. I mean, I know babies who they sleep better in their own little space. And those parents have come to me concerned. Am I not being responsive to my baby because they don't want to bed share with me, or because we're all getting less sleep bed sharing? And I tell them, no, it sounds like you're actually being responsive to your child because you're recognizing that they are sleeping better in their own sleep space next to you rather than right next to you in bed. So it doesn't look the same for all babies. But I really just advocate for and encourage parents to, one, listen to their intuition and trust their intuition, because a lot of the mainstream sleep approaches really do go against our intuition and what our drive is, what our natural drive is to do as parents, which is to go to our baby when they're crying. And just to do things that feel right to you. Don't do something that doesn't feel good. And then, in that, I think there's often two opposite ends of the extreme in this conversation. One is sleep training. It's okay to let your baby cry. They need to learn, yada, yada. But the other side of that is you have to bed share, all the time until they literally tell you, I don't want to bed share anymore. You have to breastfeed forever. And I think there's a middle ground where we have to look at the whole family unit. We have to take a big picture look at the whole family unit and their needs. And we can make some changes if things aren't working for the family. We can do that in a way that continues to be responsive. So an example of this is that if, I weaned both of my kids when they were around 2. Night weaned, not totally weaned, but night weaned them.
Okay.
Because that just wasn't working for me anymore. Breastfeeding them all night wasn't working for me anymore. And I needed to make that change. But we did it in a way that was still responsive. They still had a loving caregiver responding to their needs at night, supporting them at night, whatever that looks like, right? So there are ways to shift patterns that's responsive. It's not all or nothing. It's not intervene, sleep train, or have your child in bed breastfeeding until they're 20. Like that's just,
Yeah.
those are two extremes.
Right. And which I think so many times in this space, new parenthood and in general in this wellness space, it's so easy to fall to one side or the other and pick a polarizing side to identify with.
Right.
Where do you think self-soothing and that kind of narrative plays a role in this conversation, especially for, I think, the non-responsive sleep training?
Yeah, so self-soothing is kind of a buzzword in the sleep training world. And really, we have to define what that even means because the person that came up with this term self-soothing, his name is Dr. Tom Anders, and he actually came up with it. He used it in a research study. And basically, this term self-soothing was used to describe babies who just went to sleep on their own and there wasn't always crying involved. But in the sleep training world today, it's often used as, you have a baby crying, signaling for you, wanting to be held. And we're told you need to let them self-soothe. You need to let them learn how to self-soothe or they'll never be able to calm themselves down. But that's actually not what self-soothing was ever intended to mean. Self-soothing or self-settling is really more of a child or a person is already kind of calm. Their nervous system isn't really calm or isn't really dysregulated, and they can just kind of do something like do a soothing behavior to remain in that state, like thumb sucking or something of that nature. Whereas what the sleep training world, when they tell us we need to teach our babies to self-soothe, is actually referring to is more accurately called self-regulating. And self-regulation is when your nervous system is dysregulated, you're upset, we all know when we feel dysregulated, we're like, we're wild, we're frenzied, our babies are crying, they're red in the face, they need some support. And the truth is that babies are not wired to self-regulate. They are not capable of self-regulation. When they are dysregulated, they cannot come back down to a regulated state on their own. They are actually wired to do something called co-regulation, which is very simply put the process of basically, I like to call it letting our child borrow our calm. So we have to be close. We are calm. We try to be calm. And then they kind of borrow that. They kind of borrow that from us and it helps them to calm down. And so that's like a very, very simplistic way of describing it, but that's essentially what co-regulation is. And our children are actually wired for co-regulation up until some researchers say up until their 20s. And it really depends. There's this really great, I have it somewhere on my social media account because I've shared it before, but it's a really great chart of co-regulation versus self-regulation by age. And it kind of just looks like this roller coaster. Like as your baby gets a little bit older, they can do a little bit more self-regulation, but then the parent is still giving a lot of regulation input too. And that parental input lessens a little bit and the child input increases a little bit, but then something will happen, a milestone, a stressor, something, and then the parent will have to give more regulation input and the child will back up a little bit because that's how it is. It's dynamic. It just depends on the child. It depends on what's going on. There's a lot of like nuance here. And so there's also, because I get asked a lot, what age can a baby or a child be able to self-regulate? Well, it's not that simple. It's more of a very gradual process. We give a lot of regulation at the beginning. We're basically doing it all. And then we back away a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And they do more. They take on more of it. But we're still offering some support throughout their entire childhood, basically. And so, that's basically, it's just simply not true that we can teach babies to self-soothe or self-regulate, whatever you want to say, by leaving them alone. The way that we actually teach babies to self-regulate is by co-regulating with them. We do it for them first. That's how they learn. And then again, over time, they take on a little bit more of that responsibility. We do a little bit less, but that's like a very gradual process over years and years and years. And they have to have thousands of co-regulation opportunities. And so these are really just buzzwords and they don't really mean anything. And if you think about it, what other developmental milestone, what other like motor milestone, like think about crawling or walking or feeding. How are we teaching our babies to do those things? Are we sitting our baby in the high chair and walking, like our infant in the high chair and
Yeah.
walking away from them and they have food on their plate and saying, okay, eat your food? No,
Yeah.
like we're doing it for them first. And then when they're ready, we're letting them take on a little bit more of that, a little bit more of that. Same thing with going to the bathroom. You know, do we stick our newborn on the toilet and say, okay, go to the bathroom and wipe yourself? No, we're doing all of it for them initially until they're ready to learn more and to take on more of that responsibility. And it's no different for emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm. Which is just so fascinating to me with the pressure, I feel like, stepping into motherhood. And you hit the nail on the head, just talking about like the expectation that I set for myself. And then just seeing, I think, social media influence of, I have to provide this like innate sense of regulation that my baby has never seen before. Like we model, like you said, so many of these other behaviors and so many other patterns. And yet the expectation is that I'm going to put my son in his crib and it will be fine. And I'm going to just swallow whatever feels I have about the fact that I have to leave him in his crib and it's time for him to be out of the bedroom and all of those things.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that is really important for parents to understand and consider too is that humans cannot learn in a stressed state. So if the whole goal is teaching our babies these quote unquote, skills, because really, I don't think these are skills that need to be like taught. Like you don't need to sit down and teach them. You just need to have your child experience them with you. It's modeling. But even so, like even if we could teach them these things in this way, they don't learn it when they're stressed. And so if your baby is dysregulated and red in the face and crying and screaming for you, they're learning nothing. They are not learning anything of value and importance that they can then take with them and use in their life. It's just not happening.
Sure. I'm super curious to hear. I think this would be one of the biggest things when it comes to just misunderstandings with the sleep world. What would you say are some of the other things that you wish you could clarify on this topic?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, really, we need a whole overhaul of our perception, like just general societal perceptions of how babies and children should sleep. I think one of the biggest ones is this expectation that our babies should sleep through the night and have consolidated sleep at such a young age. Sleep is actually very commonly not linear in the first year of life. It's often just a roller coaster, up and down, ebbs and flows. There's lots of milestones happening, lots of little stressors all throughout, especially that first year that one of the things parents I think are often surprised about is that their newborns are often sleeping better than their older babies. And so they think, oh, my, 2-month-old is sleeping almost through the night. Like they're waking up one time for a feed. Like I've arrived. We've arrived at good sleep. It will only get better from here. And then they're surprised to find that at 6 months, 8 months, whatever, their baby's now waking 2 or 3 times a night to feed, or their baby's more restless, or their baby's harder to get to sleep. And this is all very normal and developmentally appropriate when we look at it from a developmental lens. But parents don't have that expectation going in, and so they're thrown. And they're like, "What's going on? What am I doing wrong? What's wrong with my baby?" So that's one. I mean, it's very, very normal for babies to wake at night. It's actually protective for them to wake at night. Babies sleep in a lighter stage of sleep on average than adults, and this is good for them. It's actually when their brain growth happens. And so it's important that we're not trying to force them into longer or deeper stages of sleep before they are ready. So they also, especially in the context of breastfeeding, breast milk is digested very quickly, and it's very normal for babies to wake every few hours or so to eat even at night. And so that's just, I think, a really major one that a lot of people don't know. They think of baby waking at night as bad. Really, baby waking at night is good, and it's how they're designed, and it's beneficial and protective for them. Is it inconvenient? Yes, absolutely, it's inconvenient, but it is how they're designed to function. And so we have to kind of think about what are the potential consequences of trying to get our baby to behave and sleep in a way that they were not designed to behave and sleep.
I think that's so interesting because one of the first, I think, posts or information that a friend sent me of yours was referring to, if your spouse or loved one came to you and asked for, hey, there were several examples, like I need a snack or I need a hug or some level of need from you and you just kind of dismissed it, like, well, like, I gave you a hug 30 minutes ago, you should be fine. Or didn't you just have a snack? And it was kind of just this shift for our family, especially to say, wait a minute, like, if I wouldn't do this to a grown adult, then I don't have to have this pressure to dismiss my son when he needs to nurse in the middle of the night. And he just turned 2. So we're still just trying to navigate that process for our family. But I think looking at it, like you said, through the lens developmentally and even just personally, because the expectation of my husband, for whatever reason, was so much lower than the expectation I had for my toddler.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's really true in a lot of this, is that we often have higher expectations for our children and how they should be sleeping than we do. And it's almost as if unknowingly, I don't think that we're doing this on purpose, but we think of our children and babies as little robots, and without realizing it, of course. But I can't tell you how many families I've talked to that, their baby slept through the night once. And so they're frustrated now because now they're not sleeping through the night, but they've done it before. So why can't they sleep through the night every night? Why are they, they were sleeping great for a month, but now they just had a wake last night. They woke 2 times or whatever. And I'm thinking, have you ever had a night where you're really stressed about something, or maybe you got into an argument with your partner and so like it wasn't resolved, so you're just going into bed and you're stressed and you're not able to get to sleep easily, or you're waking more frequently, or maybe you ate something that upset your stomach and so that's affecting your sleep, or you're sick. I mean, there's a million things that impact our sleep as an adult. We don't all have perfect nights. We don't all sleep through the night every night. Like, most of us are waking a little bit at night, especially if we have something else going on, stress-wise or nutrition-wise or whatever. But we expect our babies to have the perfect night every night. Otherwise, we think something's wrong. Yeah, it is really interesting. And in terms of the emotional needs, I also like to think of it as, because I think people relate to this more, because when I talk about what if your husband, came to you and wanted to connect with you in the middle of the night? I get that. Well, I'd say no, go to bed. And I'm like, okay, I get that. I get that. But the difference is that your spouse hopefully has some developed emotional regulation skills and can meet their own needs in most ways. So our babies and our children can't, and they don't have emotional regulation skills. But I also like to then say, okay, what about like an elderly person who has dementia at a nursing home? What if, we were denying them those needs at night, or we were leaving them in their bedroom all night long to cry and nobody ever checked in on them because they should just be sleeping? I mean, that tugs at the heartstrings, right? Like, that's not a respectful way to treat someone,
Right.
And the same is true of our babies and our children.
Oh, for sure. How would you encourage parents, I think, first to manage our expectations when approaching our young babies or children, especially knowing these milestones are going to come up and just like life happens?
Yeah. I mean, I think it really goes back to a total reframe and understanding of what is biologically normal and why, because I think that why, helps you to accept it. And just not paying attention to a lot of the mainstream sleep stuff, because it is just flawed and it's not accurate and it's not based on developmental and biological norms. And in fact, it actually can be harmful, because like from a breastfeeding perspective, trying to do early weaning in the first few months of life or spacing out feeds can actually have a negative impact on your breast milk supply. And I've worked with lots of families that early sleep training, or even not, they didn't even call it sleep training, but just spacing out feeds and like declining at like 3, 4, 5, 6 months old, caused them to lose their breast milk supply. And then they didn't breastfeed as long as they wanted to. And so managing your expectations, just first knowing what are reasonable goals. Like, it's not a reasonable goal for all babies and all children to be sleeping independently at any given age. And I think it's also just, there are things that could be going on and we could do. There's lots of things we can always do to improve and optimize sleep. But I think I try to reframe parents, or help parents reframe and think, as long as I'm responding to my child's needs, whatever those are, I'm making the right choice. I'm doing what's best for them. And I'm not like harming them, because that's what I think a lot of parents have been given the idea that by sleep training culture, that if they respond to their baby too much, or if they hold them too much, or if they comfort them too much or feed them too much, it's now the parent's fault that they're sleeping this way. And that's not true. When we're responsive to our baby's needs, they don't have needs because we're responsive. They're signaling their needs because we're responsive, because that's how the design is. And so we're doing a great job in that. But yeah, I think just managing your expectations, having realistic goals, not expecting so much independence from our child, and just really realizing that this is, I mean, I know that it feels really hard. I've had the hardest struggles with sleep myself, with my children. But I also have the perspective now of having an almost 6-year-old who slept really poorly, I thought, when she was an infant, and now she's pretty much independent. I have that perspective of realizing this is not forever. I know it's hard. Like, this is not forever though. And it will pass, and the independence will happen. And to know that dependence fosters independence. So when we can fully let our child depend on us as they were meant to, that actually only encourages the independence when it's time for that, which is, I think, really hard for parents to grasp, because in our culture, we're really told you have to push the independence, you have to get them independence ASAP. And that's just not how development works. And it can actually backfire on you a little bit too.
Oh, absolutely. And it's been so freeing to take that weight or expectation off of myself, because even this week, as you've shared your 5 steps for connection to just like implement small steps towards regulation has made all the difference. So I would love to just hear some of those tips that you would encourage families to start making the small adjustments as they, kind of attempt this overhaul.
Yeah. So this is it seems a little contradictory when parents reach out and they're like, how do I get my baby to be independent? Well, first of all, I say you can't get your baby to be independent because they may not be ready for that. But if you're trying to facilitate some independence, some ease, some just less stress, especially surrounding bedtime routines, and bedtime in general, my first approach, my main approach is always to suggest more connection, more closeness, more proximity. And parents are like, what? I want less of that. I'm like, yeah, I know. Trust me though. Trust me. Like so the way it works is basically that attachment, connection, whatever you want to call it, relationship is a primary need that children have. And it's as foundational as shelter, as food. It was actually really interesting. I saw a post from Dr. Vanessa Lapointe, who's amazing, just I think today or yesterday, that was talking about this. And she said, children would die without connection, without attachment. It's literally that foundational. I think people brush this off a lot, but it really is, because if their emotional needs are not met, and obviously these are extreme cases. We're not talking about, even a night of sleep training, but it still applies to how important this is. They will die, and it's their emotional neglect. And so when our children have their foundational needs met, that frees them up to then go forth and be their own person and do their own thing and be independent, versus when they don't feel like their attachment needs are met, when their relationship needs are met, they're always, or any other need, their hunger, thirst, whatever, they're always seeking to have those foundational needs met. And so we get that. Like if a child is starving, they're not going to go out and play games. They're going to figure out how to find their next meal. The same is true, though, for connection and attachment. If that's lacking, they're always going to be seeking that attention, that connection, that relationship with somebody. And so when we can meet those needs and kind of overflow them, really, then they don't have to be searching for that. And then they can go, and it frees them up, basically. It lets them live freely and be their own person. Now, of course, this is age appropriate. And, as developmentally appropriate, we can't expect a 1-year-old to be independent, just because you're loving on them. Like, certain ages just need more closeness and proximity. But when we meet those needs, they're more likely to then go off and play on their own for a little bit, versus if we're always pushing them away. No, I can't hold you. No, I can't play with you. No, I just need a minute. Then they're going to be constantly coming at us saying, please, mommy, hold me, please. Can you, it's like, it fosters more neediness from them. They're more clingy and more needy because they're searching for that. And so however you can, just focus on little moments built into your day of connecting with your child. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. We're doing the 5-day connection challenge right now. And this is something that I built just because it's super simple. It's 5 basic strategies that are super easy to build into your day. And I always just kind of do them when I'm feeling like things are a struggle in my house, when my children are extra whiny or emotional or whatever. And I'm like, okay, I'm realizing I'm not connecting with them as much as I should. And unfortunately, life happens and I don't always continue all 5 of the strategies every day. But the goal is to make these habitual so that they're easier to incorporate into your day. And like one of them is just playing for 10 minutes with your kids, sitting down one-to-one, no phones, no screens, and playing, or, it might not be one-to-one, it might be 1-to-2, or however many kids you have, and just playing for 10 minutes. And I like to do that at the start of the day. And I notice a huge difference because my children begin their day feeling connected with me, feeling like I'm seeing them, I'm hearing them, I'm caring about them. And then it frees them up to go and be independent. And there's lots of little things you can do specifically with like the bedtime routine. Instead of focusing on pushing them away, saying, you have to go to bed, you have to stay in your room, whatever that looks like. If we think about it, that's causing them to focus on the separation of the night and separation from you. And that can cause an alarm reaction in their bodies. That's the stress response. It's stressful for a young child to be separated from their parent. And instead, what we can do is we can shift that focus from, you have to go over here, you have to get out, to when is the next time we're going to connect? Maybe it's in the morning. I'll see you in the morning. In the morning, we're going to have a really big breakfast, or in the morning, we're going to go play at the park together. Or, maybe you you tell them, I'm going to come in and check on you all throughout the night. And I'm going to leave you a heart, a little paper heart each time I check on you. And then in the morning, you count the hearts. So things like that, it shifts their attention to the next time you're going to connect with them. It shifts their attention to knowing, hey, mommy or daddy or whoever is thinking about me and caring about me. And they're, one of the simplest ways to do this is if you have a video baby monitor, is just turning on the monitor as you're tucking them in and say, look, I can see you in your bed right here, and I'm going to be watching you all night long. And I'm thinking about you.
Yeah.
And so those are just super easy ways that really require almost no effort or time on our part to help them feel connected and help their connection cup overflow so that they don't have to be searching for that.
Yeah, that's perfect and so easy to implement, as I've worked on that this week. And I'm sure that you've had just this conversation with, I'm sure, many families that have made the transition from the sleep training lifestyle and now want to make the shift. How would you speak to those families that probably are wrestling with the guilt or shame or what have I possibly done wrong? How can I undo whatever, quote unquote damage that I'm sure is just really heavy in the transition for this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know, we all do things as parents that are not ideal. We all make choices that are not amazing before we know better. And I think we just can't beat ourselves up over it. We do the best we can with what knowledge we have at any given moment. And so when we get new knowledge, we can change the way we do things. But I think it's not always helpful to kind of dwell in the past. And we never know. Like, we just don't ever know, did this affect my child in this way? I could say, I wonder all the time, I see some differences in my 2 children. And my older one, I did do a little bit of sleep training with her for a few minutes at a time. And so I do wonder, is she like this right now because I didn't hold her enough as a baby, or because I was so focused on getting her to sleep by herself? But that doesn't help me. And the truth is, we just don't know. A lot of it could just be temperament. It could be personality. There's a million factors that can determine or could be causing that. And so I don't really think that's helpful to dwell on that. But what we can do is just parent in a way that aligns with our values moving forward. And in terms of sleep training versus no sleep training, that just looks like being responsive, being responsive as much as you can. Of course, we're never going to be perfectly 100% responsive right away all the time, but showing our children that we care, that we want to respond to their needs, and that we're there for them, that's enough. And the really good thing about this, the thing that is just really optimistic, is that our children's brains, all of our brains really, but our children's brains are so malleable and neuroplastic. There's so much neuroplasticity that you just repair. You just repair by doing
Yeah.
better. You can repair. You can repair with them. There's not necessarily going to be lasting damage or anything like that. And so it's not, too late. It's not ever too late. It's not ever, it's too late and I've done so much damage to my child. There's always room for repair and recovery from that.
Yeah, I love that. I'll transition a little bit to some of our listener questions, and I'm super curious to know, because this is our current stage of life, but how would you encourage parents through the young toddler years? Like I said, my son is 2. We're still nursing, where our family is using a lot of discernment around weaning, night nursing. But man, toddlers, how would you encourage families during just those huge developmental moments?
Yeah, toddlers it's such a hard stage, especially when you're still breastfeeding and maybe bed sharing and there's still awakes. And so first I would say, it is normal for your toddler to still wake at night. There was a study that was like just a survey study to kind of figure out the patterns of how much babies and toddlers were waking. And it found, I think it was up to like 36 or 42 months, that on average, toddlers were still waking like 3 times a night or something. So it's not abnormal if your toddler is waking. A lot of parents think that. But yeah, I mean, I would say, toddlers are so variable. You could have an 18-month-old who is like sleeping through the night and doesn't nurse, like maybe they weaned on their own even. And then you can have like a 3-year-old or a almost 4-year-old or whatever who's still waking a lot and bed sharing, and it's seeming very hard to make any transitions with them. And so one, I would say don't compare your toddler to another toddler, because there's just such a wild variation of temperaments and personalities like we've been talking about, and needs. And it's okay. I always tell parents, there's nothing wrong with your child. Your child just has different needs than the next toddler over here. It's not one is bad and one is good. They're just different. But also, parents, it's okay to make changes if you feel like you need to make them. I just always tell parents to reflect on why they're making the changes or why they want to make the changes. Is it because they have a real reason, like this is just not working for them anymore? Or is it because their pediatrician or their mom or their friend told them you need to do this now, or it's time, or your child shouldn't be in bed with you anymore? Because in my opinion, those reasons are not good enough reasons. That's just external pressure. That is, none of it is true, really. Whereas if you have a legitimate reason, then you can absolutely make those transitions. But when you're making transitions like independent sleep space or night weaning with a toddler, those are the 2 most common ones that I cover. It's important to move slowly if you can.
Okay.
But always be kind of reflecting on how is your child responding? And then how also are you responding? How is this feeling to me as a parent? Am I able to stay calm in supporting my child's emotions at night when I'm night weaning them, for example? How is this feeling to all of us? Because if it's not feeling good, then you can always back off and maybe it's not the right time and maybe you can try again in a couple of months. Or, maybe sometimes you need to move a little bit faster. This was my experience with my son when I night weaned. I had to night wean my daughter and my son in totally different ways because they're just different people. And I ended up I started off slow with my son and it was not working. Everything was getting worse. I was trying to be really gradual with him. And then I realized I can't do the same approach as I did with my daughter. I have to cold turkey night wean him, which I don't recommend usually as a first approach. It's usually more you experiment and you kind of see. But then that was what I had to do with him. And it worked really well, actually. It was hard, but it worked.
Yeah.
And so it just goes to show that every child is so different. Just experiment, try something, try to make a transition, see how it's feeling, and don't be afraid to either stop if it's not working for you or switch it up if you feel like you need to try something different.
Yeah. And that's definitely been the conversation that my husband and I have had, especially with, we're just under such a transient season right now. We're in and out of our home. My husband and I are very dysregulated, just trying to navigate where we're going to live with this current mold crisis. So we've had to step back. And it was this point of my husband and I being like, none of us are sleeping. We're all completely dysregulated. And we all feel safe. And my son feels safe. And everybody's getting more sleep when he's in bed with us. So it was very much an evaluation process for us.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I mean, if there is a lot of stressors in your life, it's probably not the best time, unless it's something that is related and necessary, right? It's probably not the best time to make any big transitions like that, because when a family has stress, the child has stress too,
Mhm.
and they're experiencing that and they're picking up on that. And so, yeah, it's not going to be very productive. If you can wait to make any big transitions until things have settled
Yeah,
down, that's usually the best approach. I know sometimes there's like medical issues, like mom has to wean for a certain medical issue. That's a little bit different,
sure.
of course, because that's just part of it. But if it's not a necessity, then it's usually best to wait until things are a little calmer.
Definitely. And it's been this like plug and play kind of evaluation process, which has been just so freeing because, like you said, canceling out the noise of the counsel in my life, and we love them, whether it's social media, people, friends, and just like really honing into my husband and I's intuition, the goals and values that we have for our family, and making decisions off of that. So
Yeah.
I have one more question, and I think you really kind of touched on it, but you talked about the gray area of this in between of it doesn't have to be co-sleeping, but it's not, cry it out method. You're completely non-responsive to your child. What would be an example or way to, I guess, paint the picture of what the in-between could look like to give some of these families that have no idea what either end of the spectrum look like, find confidence in the middle?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I want to say here is that, it doesn't always have to be co sleeping. That's correct. But however, with some children, it is going to be co sleeping because some babies
Okay.
are not going to let you put them in the crib. And so it also really just
Yeah.
depends on your child and what their needs are. But in terms of kind of an in between, I mean, one example of this is just, for the parent who really doesn't want to bed share, they could still be responsive to their baby in the crib. It's totally possible. Maybe they keep the crib in the room just to make it a little bit easier on them. Plus, that's recommended
Mm-hmm.
for the first year of life. Maybe they have a sidecar set up, even where the side of the crib is off and kind of pushed up to the bed, so baby's still in their own sleep space, but it's kind of connected to the bed, so it's more like bed sharing, and they're still responding to them. Or maybe if you really don't want to nurse your baby all the way to sleep, maybe you feed your baby and then you kind of unlatch them when they've had their fill, and then you try supporting them to sleep in another way if that's if
Mm-hmm.
the actual feeding to sleep constantly isn't working for you. Maybe that's your toddler, instead of bed sharing, your toddler is sleeping on a mattress on the floor, like their own mattress on the floor
Yeah.
next to your bed if you have space for that. So there's lots of in between. And there's lots of ways to shift things. But again, it really just depends on your child, because like I've had two babies who our only option was bed sharing. And so that's why I also really dislike the language surrounding a lot of the anti-bed sharing propaganda, as if it is completely a choice. For a lot of families, it is a choice, and it's a great choice, and it's totally valid
Yeah.
and beneficial if they're doing it safely. But for a lot of families, they're bed sharing purely out of necessity. And I think some parents do have to kind of just accept the fact that maybe their baby has medical issues going on, and they really, or it's anything else, maybe they're just really
Sure.
sensitive and they really need to be close to you. And sometimes that is the case. But I would say probably most babies you can get them sleeping in their own sleep space just next to you, and you can still be responsive to them throughout the night. So you don't have to force them to sleep independently. You can still be there for them when they need you and rock them to sleep and nurse them to sleep and whatever it is that you do. Did that kind of answer your question?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Those are great options and definitely encouraging to see, it doesn't have to be this all or nothing mentality.
Yeah.
So, Taylor, this was such an awesome conversation. I would love to share just more about your platform. Where can our community connect with you, or courses or things that you have available for our community?
Yeah, so my website is taylorkulik.com, and I'm mostly on Instagram, which my handle is @taylorkulik, and I have a podcast called Let's Sleep on It, Reclaiming Parenthood. You can also just search my name. And then I have multiple e-courses. I have an infant foundation sleep e-course, and I have a toddler foundation sleep e-course. And then I also do webinars. So I do like monthly webinars. Most of the time it's rotating between night weaning or transitioning to the crib, because those are, like we talked about, the two big transitions that a lot of families are wanting to make with their child. And so I offer just like hour-long webinars about that topic every once in a while. And I have some like free e-guides. If you want to go to my Instagram account, I have those linked in my bio. If you just need some like free resources to get you started.
Awesome. I will definitely link all of those, and I'm definitely excited to dive in myself with our toddler right now. So I have one more closing question for you that we have for all of our guests, just because this is a platform for sharing wisdom, which you've done a lot of already. But if you could provide any wisdom to your younger self or for a community that is listening, what would you share?
I always say follow your intuition. I mean, it's the most basic one, but I feel like so many of the mainstream parenting strategies are just really go against our intuition, and parents are constantly battling that like internal, like, I don't want to do this, but they're telling me I have to do it. People are telling me I have to do it. And so just trust your intuition, and you don't have to listen to outside people who are telling you to do something that feels wrong. And I feel like you can't go wrong if you're following your intuition for the most part.
Yeah, that was perfect. Well, thank you so much, Taylor. This was an awesome conversation, and I'm just super excited to share it with our community.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and we will catch you guys on the next episode. Thank you for listening, friend. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you don't want to miss any wisdom or encouragement, be sure to subscribe to the show. And don't forget to rate and review. Your feedback means so much and helps our community grow. If you're looking for more wellness wisdom and free resources, head over to livingwiselywell.com or get connected with me on Instagram at wiselywell. And if you're looking for a break from the hurried health lifestyle, check out my Return to Rest resource for tangible ways to slow down and finally find rest.